Vincent, I always know we're in store for some good stuff when I get your report, and there is some wild imagery in here. So for those that want to download it, go find it. Vincent Deluard is a global macro strategist at INTL FC Stone. Why are we about to experience a big generational divide?
Well, first of all, I think we're not about to experience it. We've experienced it for 30 years, and it's been growing. I mean, remember before this all happened, we thought the funniest thing was these OK Boomer memes. And I think that really captured this generational resentment. And we can look at it in any sort of statistics you want. But by and large, the single best predictor of wealth and income is not gender, is not race. I mean, these things matter, but by and large, it's age. And this gap between generations has increased tremendously over the past 50 years. 1982, if you made the minimum wage, which is the situation of most young workers, you need to work for 4 days to buy one share in the S&P 500 index. Now you need to work for 2 months. So if you own wealth, which is generally what the older generations do, you can buy a lot more labor with that wealth. And that has been the biggest driver of this widening gap. And it was already close to a breaking point before. And what I think that COVID-19 impact is going to make that even worse. I mean, it's as if this disease had been designed by an economist with a huge focus on demographic. I mean, it's vicious in the way that it really only kills the old, or overwhelmingly kills the old. But on the other hand, the cost, if we do lockdowns, is really borne by the young. I mean, think about the college kids that are graduating in May, June, and they're going to start with six-figure college debt and a 25% unemployment rate. Think about the nurses, the truck drivers, the gig economy who are getting completely massacred for this, or even, I'm sure, like young professional workers who have to juggle, Zoom meetings, family, still have to pay the school. I mean, this is really hurting the young in order to save the old.
So, Vincent, right now, I get the point here, which is that those who are collecting checks from Social Security or those that hold assets have a lot less at risk during this period. That part is very easy for me to get. The other part, I think, is a little bit more nuanced, though, because to your point here, some of the most successful parts of this market during this containment have been the very futuristic tech parts of this market, and a lot of that is very much focused towards a younger generation and an ability to be mobile. Is that not going to be more in their ballpark if so much of this economy shifts towards online for a lasting period?
Yeah, that is a good point. Actually, I would almost think of it the other way. I think it's precisely because growth has become so elusive, because our economies have not created the kind of jobs that are required for household formation, because these really high housing prices have prevented my generation from buying a house, making babies, that the few areas that could actually provide this growth trade at such high multiples. If you had an economy where growth was abundant, like in the 70s, the premium for you can grow your earning by 10% a year, well, that's not so great. So in a way, the rise of the FANG and the big tech is also a byproduct of this era of low growth, low inflation, and high asset price.
The chart, you've got a couple charts here. The first one I want to get into looks at the difference between the Social Security payments and the federal minimum wage. Is, I think, a very interesting one as we see Social Security payouts surpassing what the minimum wage has done. So I imagine this is part of it where, to your point, you have to work, 4 days on minimum wage to acquire a share of stock, a share of the S&P 500? Is that the math that you're doing, as opposed to what it used to be 20 or 30 years ago?
Yeah, so it used to be 4 days, now it's 2 months. Obviously, so minimum wage is less than Social Security cost of living adjustment. And then the vicious part, I think, is really on the inflation differential. So we have, just one CPI number that we report, the CPIU. And really, that's two numbers. You have generally the price of most things has fallen. The Walmart effect, the Amazon effect, the made in China effect. But you had 4 categories that have really outstripped inflation: healthcare, college, childcare, and housing prices. Now, who do you think and rents? Who do you think pays this in terms of generation? Who pays rents? Well, the young. Who has to pay for education in college? Well, the young. Who has to pay for childcare? Well, young parents. And finally, who has to pay for well, I forgot what my last one was. But the point is, you had two CPI, one that is inflationary, that is mostly experienced by the young, and one that is deflationary, that is mostly experienced by the old. Now, if we look in terms of Social Security payment, they actually indexed on the general CPI. So the more life becomes unaffordable for young households in major urban areas who have to pay for college, who have to pay for education, who have to pay for healthcare. I mean, that is the biggest one, the one I forgot. Healthcare is covered by Medicare for the old generation. It's not a cost. Their insurance premium are paid by the young generation. So that gap keeps building and building. So what I can calculate is that at the current pace where we are, the generational gap grows by 4% a year. Now, if something grows by 4% a year, that means it doubles every 15 years. I don't think we can afford this much longer.
So the age-adjusted consumer price indexes you have right now are basically normalized by generation. Some of the parts here that certain generations bear more of a burden to pay for than the others. How contingent is the scenario you're describing right now on an increasing inflationary front? Do you have an implicit view about what is happening right now that's going to exacerbate this even more? Because again, I'll throw another scenario. What if these municipalities just suddenly go bust and they can't pay out pensions and they can't pay out security benefits for those that are counting on? None of the young people have pensions. I imagine that would hit the older generation.
Right. And I think that's absolutely the solution eventually is to have some sort of inflation, some sort of reset, low asset prices. I mean, inflation at the end helps the young. I mean, it means that wages are going up. It means that asset prices are going down. So that is the solution to this generational inequality issue. That is what happened in the 70s. I mean, how did the boomers acquire their wealth? Well, it's because inflation paid off their mortgage in the 70s. You know, when inflation was 15% a year and you bought fixed rate, in 10 years it was gone. They were also able to buy stocks at 7 to 8 times earnings. And that's probably what we need for this generation. Either we do it explicitly, and I think we are going to see more and more of these policy proposals being floated, like cancel college debt, moratorium on rent payments, universal basic incomes. All these things, I think, have gained quite a lot of attention with COVID-19. So this is a turning that I expect it to take 5 to 10 years. It could be that COVID has compressed our timeline to 5 months. And eventually, so inflation, broad inflation, not rising healthcare price, not rising asset price, not the kind of inflation we've seen for the past 10 years. You need to invert that. Deflation in that basket I was talking about, and then inflation in the rest of the economy in order to rebalance this generational equilibrium.
Vincent, if those things don't happen, just last point here, does it negate many of the bull cases that folks have made over the last year that you should go to where the millennial buying power is and follow stocks and investments where millennials are starting to be able to spend? New homes was an early one of this past year. Does that mean that trade is under threat?
Right. I mean, we will have to see, when we come out of this lockdown, what the policy response is, and specifically what mix we have between monetary policy and bailout, which generally favor the older generation as kind of like the European solution to the crisis. Bail out everybody, make sure that the pension funds are still okay, and then constantly apply monetary stimulus in order to keep the system afloat. If that happens, then it would prolong this generational crisis. If, on the other hand, we are seeing a shift towards fiscal stimulus, a shift towards inflation, a shift towards pro-growth policies, then yes, the place to be is going to be household formation expense for millennial and Gen Zers. By the way, most millennials now are really not that young anymore. I think also in general inflation-sensitive asset. And every time you have me on the show, usually you corner me by saying, well, if you're bearish on equities, what are you going to do with your money? And that's the hardest one. What is the alternative? You're not going to buy bonds. Well, there is one asset that trades at generational low, at secular lows. That's inflation. So whether you look at the price of commodities or inflation-sensitive assets like Latin American stocks or even CPI swaps, this is an asset class that is massively underpriced. Now, over the next quarter, 2 quarters, I have no ideas. It could be that we have more deflation because of what's happening in the oil market. But over the next 10, 15 years, which is the time frame that my clients who are pension funds need to look at, this is where the biggest opportunity lies.